The sound of my fingers typing on the laptop keyboard echoed through the quiet study of our Greenwich mansion. At 35, I had mastered the art of working silently, a skill developed over years of late nights and early mornings while my family slept peacefully around me. The research I was reviewing could revolutionize artificial intelligence processing speeds by 400%. But to everyone in this house, I was just Sophia, the serious older sister who spent too much time on computers. Through the French doors, I could see the perfectly manicured lawn that stretched toward the stone walls marking our property line. Greenwich, Connecticut had always been about appearances, the right address, the right schools, the right social circles. Our family had checked all those boxes, and from the outside, we looked like we had everything figured out. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 a.m., and almost immediately, I heard the familiar sound of bare feet padding down the marble staircase. Madison was finally awake. At 22, my little sister had never been much of a morning person. Especially during her winter break from Stanford, Mom's voice drifted from the kitchen, where she was probably already on her second cup of coffee and her first real estate call of the day. Vivian Blackwood had built her luxury property business from nothing, and she attacked each day with the intensity of someone who remembered what it felt like to want more. Dad would be in his home office by now, reviewing patient files before heading to his cardiology practice. Dr. Gregory Blackwood had saved enough lives over the past 25 years to earn the respect that came with being one of Greenwich's most sought-after specialists. And then there was Madison, the miracle baby who had arrived 13 years after me. When Mom was 33 and convinced her childbearing years were behind her, the pregnancy had been a surprise, but Madison herself had been pure joy from the moment she took her first breath. Where I had been a serious, studious child who preferred books to people, Madison had been sunshine personified, bright, charming, effortlessly social. She burst into the study without knocking, her long blonde hair still messy from sleep, wearing an oversized Stanford sweatshirt that probably cost more than most people's rent. "Good morning to you too," I said, not looking up from my screen. Sophie, I'm dying. This capstone project is going to kill me." Madison flopped dramatically into the leather armchair across from my desk. "Professor Martinez assigned it right before break, and it's due the second week back. How am I supposed to write 15 pages about modern communication trends when I can barely think straight?" I saved my work and closed the laptop, giving her my attention. "What exactly is the assignment?" "We have to analyze emerging communication technologies and predict their societal impact over the next decade. It's supposed to demonstrate original research and critical thinking." She made air quotes around the last two words. "But everything's already been written about social media and smartphones and all that obvious stuff. What about artificial intelligence and communication?" I suggested. "Voice recognition, natural language processing, automated customer service systems. That field is exploding right now." Madison perked up slightly. "That actually sounds interesting. Could you help me research it? You're like super smart with all this tech stuff." Before I could respond, Mom appeared in the doorway. "Madison." "Honey, there you are?" I was about to send a search party. She smiled at both of us, but her eyes lingered on Madison with that particular warmth that had always been reserved for her youngest daughter. "I was just asking Sophie to help me with my project," Madison said, turning on the charm that had gotten her through countless childhood scrapes. "That's wonderful," Mom said. "Sophia, you should definitely help your sister. You know so much about computers and technology." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever family conversations turned to what I should do for Madison. "It's not really my area," I said carefully. "I work more with theoretical applications than communication technology." "But you have that PhD in computer science?" Dad's voice joined the conversation as he walked past the study. "Surely you can spare some time to help Madison with her senior project." I wanted to tell them that my research was confidential, that it involved proprietary algorithms worth millions of dollars, that I couldn't risk any information leaking. Instead, I said, "I'll think about it." Madison's face fell. "You'll think about it?" "Sophie, I really need help. I'm not like you. I don't just naturally understand all this technical stuff." There it was, the subtle implication that had colored our relationship for years. Madison was the social one, the likable one, the one who needed protection and assistance. I was the smart one, which meant I was supposed to provide that assistance without question. It's not about understanding, Madison. It's about doing the work yourself. That's how you learn. "Ah, come on," Mom said with a slight laugh. "Don't be so rigid, Sophia. Family helps family. I felt Dad's eyes on me from the doorway. He had that expression he got when he was disappointed but trying not to show it. The same expression he'd worn when I'd chosen to stay at MIT for graduate school, instead of coming home for Madison's high school graduation party. "I'm not being rigid," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm being realistic about academic integrity." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you always like this?" "I'm not asking you to write it for me. I just want some guidance. But you always act like helping me is beneath you or something." The tears were real. They always were with Madison. She had never learned to fake emotion because she'd never needed to. Her genuine distress had always been enough to mobilize everyone around her. "Madison." "That's not fair," I started. But Mom cut me off. "Sophia, she's your baby sister. She looks up to you? Would it kill you to spend a few hours helping her brainstorm?" I looked at the three of them. Madison with her tears and genuine frustration, Mom with her protective stance, Dad with his quiet disappointment. This was the dynamic that had shaped our family for 22 years. Madison needed something. Madison got it. And if I was the one expected to provide it, well, that was just the natural order of things. "Fine," I said. "I can give you some general guidance about AI communication trends. But you'll need to do your own research and analysis." Madison's face lit up like I'd just handed her a winning lottery ticket. "Really? Oh my God. Thank you. Sophie, you're the best sister ever." She jumped up and hugged me. And for a moment, I remembered why I loved her despite everything. She smelled like expensive shampoo and vanilla perfume, and her happiness was infectious in that way it had always been. "Maybe we could work on it this afternoon," she said, pulling back to look at me. "I promise I won't take up too much of your time." "Sure," I said, and I meant it. Maybe this could be good for us. Maybe this could be one of those sister bonding moments that normal families seem to have so effortlessly. Mom and Dad exchanged satisfied smiles over Madison's head, and I felt that familiar warmth that came with family approval. It was rare enough that I savored it when it happened. I had no idea that my moment of weakness, my desire to be the supportive big sister, would lead to the most devastating betrayal of my life. The afternoon sun was streaming through the study windows when Madison knocked on the doorframe. Actually knocked this time, which should have been my first warning sign. She was holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing that particular smile that had been getting her out of trouble since she was old enough to walk. "Peace offering," she said, setting one of the cups on my desk. "Extra cream. No sugar? Just how you like it." I looked up from my laptop where I'd been working on my latest research algorithms. The coffee was from the expensive organic blend Mom kept in the kitchen, prepared exactly the way I preferred it. Madison had been paying attention. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. That was thoughtful. She settled into the chair across from my desk, cradling her own cup. "Sophie, I owe you an apology. I was being a brat this morning. I know you're busy with your own work, and I shouldn't have assumed you'd just drop everything to help me." This was new. Madison rarely apologized, not because she was mean-spirited, but because she so rarely recognized when she'd done something wrong. People had been accommodating her wishes for so long that the concept of inconveniencing others didn't naturally occur to her. "It's okay," I said. "I should have been more helpful from the start. We're sisters. That's what sisters do." Madison's smile was radiant. "I've been thinking about what you said about AI and communication technology. It really is fascinating. I spent some time online this morning reading about voice recognition and natural language processing. Did you know that some AI systems can now detect human emotions just from speech patterns?" I blinked in surprise. That was actually an advanced concept, not something I'd expected her to discover in casual internet browsing. Yes, sentiment analysis is becoming incredibly sophisticated. Some systems can identify stress levels, deception, even predict behavioral patterns based on vocal cues. "That's exactly the kind of thing I want to write about," Madison said, leaning forward with genuine enthusiasm. "The implications for society are huge. Privacy concerns, workplace monitoring, relationship dynamics. There's so much to explore." I found myself warming to the topic despite my earlier reservations. You could structure the paper around specific applications: customer service automation, mental health screening, security applications. Each one has different ethical considerations. Madison pulled out her phone and started taking notes. "This is perfect, Sophie. You explain things so clearly. I never would have thought about the ethical angles on my own." The compliment sent an unexpected warmth through my chest. When was the last time someone in my family had praised my ability to explain complex concepts? Usually, my expertise was met with glazed eyes and polite but distracted nods. We spent the next hour discussing various applications of AI in communication. Madison asked insightful questions and took detailed notes. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding not just the technology, but its broader implication. For the first time in years, I felt like we were connecting on an intellectual level. "This has been so helpful," Madison said as we wrapped up. "I feel like I actually have a direction now, but I'm realizing I need to do more in-depth research to really understand the technical aspects. Most of the articles I'm finding are pretty surface level. That's normal for general internet sources," I said. "The really detailed research is usually in academic journals and industry publications. Those can be hard to access without university library privileges." Madison bit her lip, thinking. "Sophie, I have a huge favor to ask. I know it's presumptuous, but would it be possible for me to borrow your laptop tonight? I promise I'll be super careful with it. It's just that your academic access is so much better than what I have at Stanford, and I really want to do thorough research." I hesitated. My laptop contained not just my current research, but years of proprietary work, algorithms that hadn't been published, communication with industry leaders, preliminary patent applications. It was essentially my entire professional life in digital form. "I don't know, Madison. I have some sensitive work files on there." "I totally understand," she said quickly. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, but I promise I'll only use it for general research. I won't go into your personal files or anything. I just need access to those academic databases and journal archives." She looked at me with those wide blue eyes that had been her secret weapon since childhood. I wouldn't ask if I had any other option. "Sophie, this project is worth 40% of my final grade. If I mess this up, it could affect my graduation." The mention of graduation hit home. Madison was set to finish Stanford in 3 months. She'd worked hard for 4 years, even if that work had come easier to her than it would have to most people. I remembered the stress of senior year, the pressure to perform when everything felt like it was riding on a single assignment. 2 hours, I said finally, and only for research. No personal files, no social media, no shopping, just academic databases. Madison's face lit up like I'd just given her the moon. "Sophie, you are the absolute best sister in the world. I promise I'll be super careful. 2 hours. Academic research only." She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "This means everything to me. I know I haven't always been the greatest sister, but I really do look up to you. You're so accomplished and smart, and I want to make you proud." The words hit me in a place I hadn't realized was still vulnerable. When was the last time Madison had said she looked up to me? When had anyone in my family expressed genuine admiration for my accomplishments? "Just be careful with it," I said, pulling my hands back and closing the laptop. "And remember, 2 hours maximum." Madison practically bounced out of her chair. "I'm going to write the best paper Stanford has ever seen." "Thank you, Sophie. Thank you so much." She picked up the laptop like it was made of glass and headed for the door. Then she paused and looked back at me. "I love you, big sister." The simple declaration caught me off guard. "I love you too, Madison." After she left, I sat in the empty study feeling something I hadn't experienced with my family in years. Connection. Understanding. The warm satisfaction of being needed not just for what I could provide, but for who I was. I spent the evening working on my desktop computer, reviewing research notes and planning the next phase of my project. Around 10 p.m., I heard Madison's footsteps on the stair. Heading up to her room with my laptop, the house settled into its familiar nighttime quiet. I had no idea that upstairs in her pink and gold bedroom, surrounded by designer handbags and sorority photos, Madison was systematically copying 15 years of my professional life onto a series of USB drives. I had no idea that my baby sister, the miracle child who had brought such joy to our family, was about to commit the most calculated betrayal of my entire life. All I knew was that for the first time in years, I felt like Madison and I were finally becoming the sisters I'd always hoped we could be. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp January air that made Greenwich look like a postcard. Madison appeared in the kitchen at 7:30, unusually early for her, carrying my laptop and a steaming mug of coffee that she'd obviously prepared for me. "Good morning, sunshine," she said with a bright smile, setting both the laptop and the coffee on the counter where I was eating breakfast. "Your research databases are incredible. I found so much material last night." I looked up from my Greek yogurt and granola. Surprised by her energy, "You seem awfully chipper for someone who was up late researching." Madison laughed. "The sound light and genuine. I guess I got caught up in it. There's something addictive about following one academic paper to another. You know, I probably went over the 2-hour limit, but I was learning so much I didn't want to stop. She was practically glowing with enthusiasm, and I felt a surge of pride. Maybe I'd actually inspired her to discover a genuine interest in technology and research. Maybe this project would be the thing that helped Madison find her academic passion. Thank you again, Sophie. Seriously? You saved my entire semester? I opened the laptop to check my morning emails, running through my usual routine of reviewing overnight messages from my team. Everything looked normal. My files were exactly where I'd left them. My browser history showed only the academic databases Madison had mentioned, and there were no signs that she'd accessed anything inappropriate. 2 weeks passed in a blur of winter routine. I returned to Manhattan to my office in Midtown, diving back into the intensive work that had consumed most of my adult life. Madison went back to Stanford to finish her final semester, and our family settled into the comfortable distance that had always characterized our relationships. I was in the middle of reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant Garrett knocked on my office door. "Professor Whitmore is here to see you." He says it's urgent. Professor Edmund Whitmore had been my PhD advisor at MIT 15 years earlier, and he remained one of the few people who fully understood the scope of my work. Now in his early 60s, he consulted for several major tech companies, including mine, helping bridge the gap between academic research and commercial application. "Edmund," I said, standing to greet him as he entered my corner office. "This is a surprise. What brings you to New York?" His expression was grave in a way that immediately put me on alert. Edmund was typically cheerful, the kind of professor who'd made even the most grueling research sessions feel like intellectual adventures. "Sophia, we need to talk." He closed the door behind him and took a seat across from my desk. "I've seen something that concerns me deeply." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on my desk. "Yesterday, I received a request to review senior capstone projects for Stanford's communications department. They occasionally bring in outside experts for high-level evaluations." I nodded, not yet understanding why this would involve me. One of the papers immediately caught my attention. The author was listed as Madison Blackwood, and the moment I saw that surname, I knew I needed to examine it closely. My stomach began to tighten with a dread I couldn't yet name. Edmund opened the folder and pulled out a printed paper. The title was Artificial Intelligence in Communication, Societal Implications and Ethical Considerations. The moment I started reading, I recognized your work, Sophia. Not inspired by your work? Not similar to your work, your actual work. He handed me the paper, and I began to read. The first paragraph contained algorithms I'd spent 3 years developing. The methodology section described processes I'd perfected through months of trial and error. The technical terminology was lifted directly from my proprietary research notes. "This is impossible," I whispered, flipping through pages that contained my intellectual property presented as Madison's original research. "It gets worse," Edmund said quietly. "The formatting, the citation style, even the specific academic references. These aren't from any public database. Sophia, some of these citations are from internal company communications, preliminary patent filings, information that only you would have access to." I kept reading, my hands beginning to shake slightly. Madison had copied not just my research, but my actual writing style, my approach to presenting complex technical concepts. Even my habit of using specific analogies to explain artificial intelligence processes. She submitted this to multiple academic competitions simultaneously. Edmund continued. The Stanford Innovation Challenge, the Pacific Technology Symposium, the National Communications Research Competition. She's positioned herself as a breakthrough researcher in artificial intelligence. "How is this possible?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The night she'd borrowed my laptop for research. "Sophia, I need to ask you directly. Did you give Madison permission to use your research? Did you collaborate with her on this project in any way?" "No," I said firmly. "Absolutely not. This is theft, Edmund. Pure and simple intellectual property theft." Edmund leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of sympathy and professional concern. "I was afraid you'd say that." "Sophia, this isn't just academic dishonesty. Given the commercial value of your research, this could constitute industrial espionage." The full implications began to hit me. Madison hadn't just cheated on a college assignment. She'd stolen research worth potentially millions of dollars in patent rights and licensing agreements. She'd positioned herself as the originator of breakthroughs that could define the next decade of artificial intelligence development. "What do you recommend?" I asked, though part of me already knew this was going to destroy my family. We need to document everything immediately. I'll need copies of your original research, time-stamped files, any evidence of when this work was actually developed. Stanford will need to be notified. And honestly, Sophia, you should consider involving your legal team. I thought about Madison's bright smile that morning 2 weeks ago, the way she'd thanked me with such apparent sincerity. I thought about her excitement over her research, her claims about staying up late following one academic paper to another. She'd been copying my life's work while I slept peacefully down the hall, trusting her completely. "Can you give me 24 hours before we take any formal action?" I asked. "I need to confront Madison directly first. She's my sister, Edmund. I have to give her a chance to explain." "Of course," he said gently. "But Sophia, be prepared for the possibility that there is no explanation that makes this acceptable. What she's done goes far beyond a desperate student making a poor choice. This level of theft required planning, sophistication, and a complete disregard for your rights and trust." After Edmund left, I sat alone in my office staring at Madison's paper. Every page contained pieces of my professional identity, my years of education and research, my innovative thinking presented as her own natural brilliance. The worst part wasn't the theft itself. The worst part was the memory of how proud I'd felt when Madison had seemed genuinely interested in my work. How happy I'd been to finally connect with her on an intellectual level. She'd played me perfectly, using my own desire for sisterly bonding as the weapon to destroy everything I'd worked to build. The drive from Manhattan to Greenwich had never felt longer. Every mile gave me more time to think about what I was going to say, how I was going to handle what might be the most important conversation of my life. By the time I pulled into our circular driveway, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. The house looked exactly the same as it had 2 weeks earlier. But everything felt different now. The perfectly maintained landscaping, the stately columns, the subtle displays of wealth that had always seemed like symbols of our family's success. Now they felt like a facade hiding something rotten underneath. I found Madison in the sunroom, sitting cross-legged on the wicker couch with her MacBook open and textbooks scattered around her. She looked up when I entered, and her face broke into that radiant smile that had been charming people since she was a toddler. "Sophie, what are you doing here? I thought you were swamped with work this week." I was holding Edmund's folder containing her paper, and I set it on the glass coffee table between us. "We need to talk, Madison." Something in my tone must have warned her, because her smile faltered slightly. "Is everything okay?" I opened the folder and pulled out her Stanford capstone project. "I want you to explain this to me." Madison glanced at the paper, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. But it passed so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. "It's my senior project," she said carefully. "The one you helped me brainstorm. Remember?" "Madison, this isn't brainstorming. This is my research, my algorithms, my methodology, my proprietary work presented as your original thinking." She was already shaking her head before I finished speaking. "That's not true. Sophie, I worked really hard on this. Just because we discussed some of the concepts doesn't mean I stole your work." I flipped to a page I'd marked with a sticky note. "This algorithm for processing emotional sentiment in voice recognition. I developed this 3 years ago. It's never been published anywhere. The only place this exists is in my research files." Madison stood up and began pacing, her movements agitated. "You're being paranoid, Sophie. Maybe we developed similar ideas because we talked about the topic. Great minds think alike, right? Don't lie to me, Madison." I pulled out more evidence. Page after page of stolen work. These aren't similar ideas. These are exact copies. Technical specifications. Internal citations. Even my personal analogies for explaining complex concepts. Madison suddenly stopped pacing and turned to face me, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Okay, fine. Maybe I borrowed some of your ideas more directly than I should have, but I was desperate. Sophie, this project is 40% of my grade. I couldn't afford to fail. Borrowed. Madison, this is intellectual property theft. This research is worth millions of dollars in potential patents. You didn't borrow anything. You stole my life's work." The tears were flowing freely now, and Madison sank back onto the couch. "I'm sorry." "Okay. I'm really sorry, but I didn't know it was that valuable. I thought it was just academic research. I can change the paper. I can rewrite everything. You submitted this to 5 different competitions and 3 academic conferences. You filed provisional patent applications using my research. You can't just rewrite this away." "Madison." Before she could respond, I heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening. Mom and Dad were home from their respective offices. Arriving at exactly the wrong moment, Madison must have heard it too, because her tears suddenly intensified. "Please, Sophie," she whispered urgently. "Don't tell them. I'll fix this. I promise. Just don't ruin my relationship with Mom and Dad." The front door opened and Mom's voice carried through the house. "Madison. Sophia. Are you both here? In the sunroom?" I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. Mom and Dad appeared in the doorway together, both looking pleased to see me. Mom was still in her real estate blazer, and Dad had loosened his tie but hadn't changed out of his work clothes. "This is a nice surprise," Dad said. "What brings you home midweek?" Before I could answer, Madison spoke up, her voice shaking with emotion. "Sophie is accusing me of stealing her research for my senior project." Mom's expression immediately shifted to protective concern. She moved to sit next to Madison on the couch, putting an arm around her shoulders. "What research?" I tried to explain calmly, but I could hear my voice rising with frustration. "Madison borrowed my laptop 2 weeks ago. She copied my proprietary artificial intelligence research and submitted it as her own work for her Stanford capstone project." "That's a very serious accusation," Dad said, his tone already skeptical. "It's not an accusation," I said, holding up the paper. "It's a fact." My former PhD advisor identified the theft when Stanford asked him to review senior projects. "This paper contains years of my unpublished research." Madison was crying harder now, pressing her face against Mom's shoulder. "I didn't steal anything," she sobbed. "We talked about AI concepts together. Maybe some of my ideas were influenced by our conversations. But I did my own research. I worked really hard on this project." Mom's eyes flashed with anger. "But it wasn't directed at Madison." "Sophia, how can you accuse your sister of something so terrible? Madison wouldn't steal from you." "Look at the evidence," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "These aren't influenced ideas. These are exact copies of my work." Dad moved to examine the paper, but his body language suggested he was looking for ways to dismiss my claims rather than evaluate them objectively. "Maybe you both researched similar topics and came to similar conclusions," he said after a cursory glance. "Similar conclusion," I repeated incredulously. "Dad, this contains proprietary algorithms I developed, technical specifications that exist nowhere but in my personal research files." Madison lifted her head from Mom's shoulder, her face streaked with tears. "Why would you want to destroy me like this? I'm about to graduate Stanford. This is my future we're talking about. Your future built on stolen work," I said. Madison's sobs intensified. "She's always been jealous of me. She told our parents, ever since I got into Stanford. She's been weird about my success. And now that I'm finally doing well in a technical field like hers, she can't handle it." "That's ridiculous," I started, but Mom cut me off. "Is it ridiculous?" Mom asked, her voice cold in a way I'd rarely heard directed at me. "You've always been competitive with Madison, Sophia. You've never been able to just be happy for her accomplishments." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Competitive? I've supported Madison her entire life." "Have you?" Dad asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you can't stand the idea that your little sister might be just as smart as you are." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just dismissing my evidence. They were reframing my victimization as jealousy, my sister's theft as my own character flaw. Madison looked up at me through her tears, and for just a moment, I saw something calculating in her eyes, something that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. "I need you to withdraw this paper immediately," I said to Madison directly. "And you need to tell Stanford that you committed plagiarism." Madison shook her head firmly. "I won't confess to something I didn't do?" "Fine," I said, gathering up the evidence. "Then I'll handle this through proper channels. Stanford will conduct their own investigation." "Sophia," Dad said sharply, "if you pursue this, you'll destroy Madison's graduation, her future, her reputation, all over what might be a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding, it's theft." Mom stood up, her protective stance around Madison unmistakable. "If you do this to your sister, if you ruin her life over some academic paranoia, don't expect this family to support you." The threat was clear. Choose Madison or choose being right. Choose family harmony or choose justice. I looked at the three of them, Madison with her perfectly timed tears and her victim narrative, Mom and Dad with their absolute certainty that I was the problem, that I was the one causing unnecessary drama. At that moment, I realized that this wasn't really about the stolen research. This was about 15 years of being the responsible one, the serious one, the one who was expected to sacrifice for Madison's happiness. But I was done sacrificing, and I was definitely done being the only one in this family who cared about the truth. Back in my Manhattan office the next morning, I sat across from Celeste Pemberton, the sharp-eyed corporate attorney who had guided my company through every major legal challenge of the past decade. Her corner office on the 42nd floor overlooked Central Park, but neither of us was admiring the view. "This is more serious than simple academic dishonesty," Celeste said, spreading Madison's paper across her mahogany conference table alongside printouts of my original research files. "This constitutes intellectual property theft on a potentially massive scale." I watched as she compared the documents side by side, and she practiced eye-catching details that even I had missed. The similarities weren't just obvious, they were damning. "She's not just copied your algorithms, Sophia. She's replicated your entire research methodology, your data analysis framework, even your theoretical conclusions. This level of replication suggests systematic theft, not academic inspiration gone wrong." My stomach churned as the full implications sank in. "Can we prove when the theft occurred?" Celeste nodded toward Marcus Thornfield, my head of security, who had been silently reviewing my laptop with the focused intensity that had made him invaluable to my company. Marcus was a former military cybersecurity specialist who treated digital forensics like a battlefield strategy. "Tell her what you found, Marcus," Celeste said. Marcus looked up from his laptop. His expression grinned. "The digital evidence is overwhelming. Sophia, your laptop logs show extensive file access on the night of January 8th. Starting at approximately 10:15 p.m. and continuing until 1:30 a.m. During that 3-hour window, someone accessed over 200 proprietary files. My mind flashed back to that night. Madison taking my laptop upstairs, supposedly for 2 hours of academic research. The way she'd thanked me so effusively the next morning. The logs show multiple USB device connections during that time frame. Marcus continued. "File copy operations. Data transfers to external storage. Whoever did this wasn't browsing casually. They systematically copied your entire research archive." "That's not even the worst part," Celeste interjected. She pulled out another stack of papers. "Garrett's background investigation revealed that Madison didn't just steal your work for her senior project. My personal assistant, Garrett Sullivan, appeared in the doorway as if summoned. In his late 20s with an MBA from Wharton, Garrett had an uncanny ability to uncover information that others missed. His loyalty to me was absolute, forged through years of working together as my company grew from a startup to a billion-dollar enterprise. Madison submitted your research to 5 separate academic competitions," Garrett said, taking a seat at the conference table. "The Stanford Innovation Challenge, the Pacific Technology Symposium, the National Communications Research Competition, the Western States Academic Excellence Award, and the Future Tech Leaders Program. Each competition had significant prize money. I realized cash awards, scholarship opportunity, networking access with industry leaders. That's not all," Garrett continued. "She filed 3 provisional patent applications using your algorithms. If those patents are approved, she could potentially claim ownership of intellectual property worth millions of dollars." The betrayal cut deeper with every revelation. Madison hadn't just cheated on a college assignment. She'd systematically attempted to steal credit for 15 years of my professional work. "There's something else," Garrett said, his voice careful. "During my investigation into Madison's background, I discovered something interesting about her Stanford scholarship funding." He pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "Madison has been receiving what's called the Blackwood Foundation Merit Scholarship, full tuition, room and board, plus a monthly living stipend. Total value over 4 years is approximately $184,000. The name hit me like a physical blow. Blackwood Foundation. I'd created that foundation 8 years earlier, funding it anonymously through a complex series of shell companies and trusts. The foundation provided scholarships to promising students who demonstrated both academic excellence and financial need. I founded the Blackwood Foundation," I said quietly. The room fell silent. Celeste's eyebrows raised slightly. Marcus paused his typing, and Garrett nodded as if he'd suspected as much. "Madison has been living off your charity for 4 years without knowing it," Celeste observed. "She stole research from the same person who's been funding her education." The irony was crushing. I'd created the scholarship program to help deserving students achieve their potential. Madison had qualified based on her grades, her extracurricular activities, and her family's supposed financial need. On paper, she'd been the perfect recipient. "How did she qualify for need-based aid?" I asked. "Mom and Dad's combined income is substantial," Garrett consulted his notes. The application shows significantly understated parental income. Your parents reported a combined income of $85,000 annually, well below the actual figure. They lied on her financial aid application. It appears so. Your father reported only his basic hospital salary, not his private practice income or consultation fees. Your mother claimed to be unemployed during the application year, despite running a successful real estate business. So Madison had benefited from multiple forms of fraud: academic dishonesty, financial aid fraud, and now intellectual property theft. My sister had built her entire Stanford experience on deception. What are our legal options? I asked Celeste. For the intellectual property theft, we can pursue civil remedies, monetary damages, injunctive relief, ownership claims for any patents she's filed. For the financial aid fraud, that's a federal crime. The Department of Education takes scholarship fraud very seriously. Marcus closed his laptop and looked directly at me. Sophia, I need to ask, do you want justice or do you want revenge? The question caught me off guard. What's the difference? Justice means using appropriate legal channels to protect your intellectual property and recover damages. Revenge means using every piece of information we've gathered to systematically destroy Madison's future. I thought about Madison's tears in the sunroom, her claims that I was jealous of her success. I thought about my parents' immediate assumption that I was the problem, that I was the one causing unnecessary drama. I want justice, I said finally, but I also want consequences. Madison needs to understand that actions have ramifications, especially when those actions hurt people who've supported her. Celeste nodded approvingly. Then I recommend we start with the scholarship fraud. The Blackwood Foundation can conduct an immediate review of Madison's award based on newly discovered information about her family's financial status and academic conduct. How long would that process take? If we expedite it, 2 to 3 weeks for a preliminary decision, longer for a full investigation. But Sophia, once we start this process, there's no going back. Madison's scholarship will be revoked. She'll owe repayment of the full amount. And Stanford will be notified of the circumstances. I thought about the 18-year-old girl who'd arrived at Stanford 4 years earlier, bright and eager and full of potential. I thought about the young woman who'd sat in my study 2 weeks ago, stealing my life's work while I slept peacefully downstairs. Start the process, I said. 1 month of careful planning had transformed my initial rage into something more dangerous: calculated strategy. I sat in my office at 7 a.m., reviewing the comprehensive dossier Garrett had compiled on Madison's life at Stanford. What I discovered made my sister's theft even more galling. Madison's social media presence painted a picture of privilege that was completely inconsistent with her need-based scholarship status. Her Instagram account, followed by over 400,000 people, showcased a lifestyle funded by brand partnerships and influencer collaborations. Look at this, Garrett said, pulling up Madison's Instagram on his tablet. Designer handbags, luxury skincare products, expensive restaurants. She's been earning approximately $50,000 annually from social media partnerships while receiving need-based financial aid. The hypocrisy was staggering. Madison had been profiting from her curated image as a smart, relatable Stanford student while fraudulently claiming financial hardship to maintain her scholarship. Her brand is built around being the girl next door who works hard and studies harder, Garrett continued. Sweet, authentic, academically successful. Her most popular posts are study sessions and motivational content about perseverance. I scrolled through months of Madison's content, photos of her studying in Stanford's libraries, inspirational quotes about hard work paying off, collaboration posts with study app companies and educational technology brands. Her entire online persona was built on academic integrity and authentic success. What about her personal relationships? I asked. Garrett switched to a different folder. Madison's been dating Bryce Ashford for 8 months. He's a pre-med student at Yale, comes from old Connecticut money. His family owns textile mills throughout New England. Estimated net worth around $60 million. He pulled up photos from various social media accounts. Bryce was conventionally handsome in that preppy, privileged way that suggested polo lessons and country club memberships. In every photo with Madison, he looked slightly bored, like he was performing for the cameras rather than genuinely enjoying himself. I had Marcus run a background check on Ashford, Garrett said. Interesting guy. Multiple disciplinary actions at Yale for academic misconduct. But his family's donations to the university keep him enrolled. He's got a pattern of dating women from wealthy families, usually girls who can provide social connections or financial opportunities. A gold digger. In other words, exactly. And based on social media interaction, he seems to believe Madison comes from significant family wealth. He's probably planning to leverage your parents' medical and real estate connections for his own career advancement. The web of deception was becoming clearer. Madison had created an entire false identity built on stolen work, fraudulent financial claims, and relationships based on misrepresented family wealth. Marcus knocked on my office door and entered with a thick legal folder. "Dr. Penelope Harrington is expecting your call," he said. "I've provided her with a comprehensive overview of the scholarship irregularities we've discovered." Dr. Harrington had been directing the Blackwood Foundation's scholarship program since its inception. A former university president with 3 decades of experience in educational administration, she took academic integrity seriously. I'd chosen her specifically because I knew she wouldn't let personal relationships or political considerations interfere with proper procedures. I dialed her number, putting the call on speaker so my team could participate. "Sophia." Dr. Harrington's voice was professional but warm. "I've reviewed the materials Marcus provided. The evidence of financial misrepresentation on Madison Blackwood's scholarship application is quite serious." "What's the Foundation's standard procedure in cases like this?" I asked. "We'll conduct a comprehensive review of her entire scholarship file, financial records, academic performance, conduct evaluations. Given the nature of the allegations, I'll need to convene an emergency board meeting." "How long will that process take?" "The initial review can be completed within 2 weeks. However, given the federal financial aid implications, we'll need to coordinate with Stanford's financial aid office and potentially with the Department of Education." I felt a flutter of satisfaction. The bureaucratic machinery was beginning to turn, and once it started, Madison wouldn't be able to charm her way out of the consequences. "There's another issue," I continued. "Evidence suggests Madison has committed serious academic misconduct that extends beyond her scholarship application. Plagiarism of proprietary research, fraudulent patent applications, submission of stolen work to multiple academic competitions." Dr. Harrington was quiet for a moment. "If you can provide documentation of academic misconduct, that would certainly factor into our review. The Foundation's scholarship agreements include strict conduct clauses. I'll have comprehensive evidence delivered to your office this afternoon," I said. After ending the call, I turned to Celeste. Simultaneously, "I want you to prepare a formal complaint to Stanford's Academic Integrity Committee." Celeste nodded. "I've already drafted the initial paperwork. We'll provide the digital forensics evidence, the comparative analysis of the stolen research, and testimony from Professor Whitmore about the impossibility of independent development of these algorithms." The beauty of my approach was its systematic nature. Madison had violated multiple institutions' trust simultaneously, and each institution would conduct its own investigation according to its own procedures. She wouldn't be able to manipulate all of them the way she'd manipulated our family. "What about the patent applications?" Marcus asked. "I'll be filing counterclaims asserting prior art and ownership of the intellectual property," Celeste said. "Madison's patent applications will be contested, and we'll seek damages for attempted IP theft." As we finalized the strategic approach, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this ordeal began: control. For weeks, I'd been reacting to Madison's theft and my family's betrayal. Now I was taking proactive steps to ensure that consequences matched actions. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Madison herself. The first direct communication since our confrontation in Greenwich. The message read, "Hey Sophie, I'm sorry about how our conversation went last week. I've been thinking about everything, and I want to make things right between us. Can we talk?" I showed the message to my team. Celeste raised an eyebrow. "Damage control," she said. "Someone's getting nervous." I typed back a simple response. "I'm busy this week. We'll talk soon." Let Madison wonder what that meant. Let her spend the next few weeks in uncertainty, the same way she'd left me uncertain about whether I could trust my own family. The investigation was just beginning, and Madison had no idea what was coming for her. But she was about to learn that stealing from the wrong person could cost everything she'd built her life around, including the very scholarship that had made her theft possible in the first place. 6 weeks after initiating the investigation, I received the call I'd been waiting for. Dr. Harrington's voice was professionally neutral, but I could hear the underlying gravity in her tone. "The board has reached a unanimous decision regarding Madison Blackwood's scholarship status," she said. "I'm calling to inform you before we send the official notification." I was alone in my office, having dismissed my afternoon meetings to wait for this moment. "Tell me," The scholarship is being immediately revoked. Additionally, the foundation is demanding full restitution of all funds disbursed over the past 4 years, plus interest. The total amount is $184,700. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with something darker. How quickly will Stanford be notified? They've already been informed. The university's financial aid office received our official report this morning, along with all supporting documentation of the fraudulent application materials. What happens next? That depends on Stanford's internal procedure. But typically, students who lose their primary funding source mid-semester are given 2 weeks to secure alternative financing or withdraw from their current courses. 2 weeks. Madison would have 2 weeks to find nearly $50,000 for her final semester's tuition and expenses, or she'd be unable to graduate, Dr. Harrington continued. The board was particularly disturbed by the pattern of deception we uncovered: false financial information, undisclosed income sources, misrepresentation of family circumstances. This wasn't a simple oversight or misunderstanding. I'd provided the board with comprehensive evidence through carefully anonymous channels, bank records showing my parents' actual income, screenshots of Madison's social media showing her expensive lifestyle, documentation of her influencer earnings that she'd never reported to the financial aid office. The academic misconduct allegations have been forwarded to Stanford's Academic Integrity Committee, Dr. Harrington added. That's a separate investigation, but it will likely run parallel to the financial aid review. Thank you, Penelope. I appreciate the Foundation's thoroughness in this matter. After hanging up, I sat quietly in my office, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Manhattan. In less than an hour, Madison would receive the certified letter that would shatter her carefully constructed world. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Celeste. Stanford's Academic Integrity Committee has agreed to expedite their review based on the evidence we provided, she said. Professor Jennifer Mills, Madison's academic advisor, has confirmed that independent development of your research algorithms would have been impossible given the timeline and complexity. How long until they reach a decision? The hearing is scheduled for next week. Given the overwhelming nature of the evidence, I expect a swift resolution. I thought about Professor Mills, a respected researcher in communications technology who would understand the technical impossibility of Madison's claims. She would see immediately that the work was beyond Madison's expertise and experience. There's something else, Celeste continued. We've received notification that Madison has hired legal representation. The law firm of Morrison & Associates. Morrison & Associates was an expensive firm that specialized in educational law and white-collar defense. Their retainer alone would cost more than most people's annual salary. She's getting desperate, I observe, or her parents are. This level of legal representation suggests they're taking the situation very seriously now. That evening, I was working late in my office when Garrett knocked on my door. He looked unusually tense. Madison tried to contact you through the company's main number, he said. When our receptionist wouldn't put her through, she showed up at the building lobby. What did she want? She was asking to speak with you urgently. Building security informed her that she wasn't on your approved visitor list, so they turned her away. But Sophia, she seemed pretty desperate, crying, pleading with security to call you. I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but I pushed it aside. Madison had made her choices. Now she was experiencing the consequences. Did she say anything specific? Only that it was a family emergency and she needed to speak with you immediately. My phone buzzed with a text message from Madison. Sophie, please call me. Something terrible has happened with my scholarship and I don't understand what's going on. I need my sister right now. I showed the message to Garrett. He read it and shook his head. She still doesn't realize you're behind this. Does she? Apparently not. Madison had always assumed that her charm and family connections would protect her from serious consequences. The idea that her own sister might hold her accountable probably hadn't occurred to her. Another text arrived. The foundation is saying I committed fraud, but that's not true. Mom and Dad are freaking out and I don't know what to do. Please help me. Then another. I know we had that fight, but you're still my sister. I need you. I turned off my phone and slipped it into my desk drawer. Madison would have to navigate this crisis the same way she'd navigated her academic career, on her own merit. Without assistance from family members she'd betrayed and deceived. The next morning brought news of Stanford's preliminary decision. Professor Mills had presented the Academic Integrity Committee with a detailed analysis comparing Madison's paper to my original research. The similarities were so extensive and precise that committee members had described them as unprecedented in their experience with plagiarism cases. Madison's hearing was scheduled for the following week, but the preliminary findings had already been communicated to her academic advisor. She was being recommended for degree revocation, permanent notation on her academic record, and potential referral for criminal prosecution. I was reviewing the committee's preliminary report when Marcus appeared in my office doorway. "You need to see this," he said, setting his tablet on my desk. The screen showed Madison's Instagram account, but something was different. Her typical polished posts had been replaced with a raw, emotional video that had been posted just hours earlier. In the video, Madison sat in what looked like her Stanford dorm room, her face streaked with tears and her usual perfect styling absent. She spoke directly to the camera with a vulnerability I'd never seen from her before. "I want to address some rumors that have been circulating about my scholarship and my academic work," Madison said in the video. "I'm being accused of things I didn't do, and my entire future is being threatened by people who want to see me fail." She wiped her nose with a tissue before continuing. "I've worked incredibly hard for 4 years to earn my degree from Stanford. I've maintained a high GPA, contributed to campus life, and built a platform that inspires other young women to pursue their educational goals. Now all of that is being destroyed by false accusations." The video had been posted for less than 6 hours, but it already had over 50,000 views and thousands of comments expressing support and outrage on Madison's behalf. "She's trying to control the narrative," Marcus observed, making herself the victim before the official findings are released. I scrolled through some of the comments. Madison's followers were rallying around her, expressing anger at Stanford and the Scholarship Foundation, organizing hashtag campaigns, demanding justice for their favorite influencer. Can she win in the court of public opinion even if she loses in the official investigations? I asked. "Not if people understand the full scope of what she did," Marcus replied. "But if she can frame this as institutional persecution of a successful young woman, she might be able to salvage her influencer career even if her academic career is over." I realized that Madison was far more strategic than I'd given her credit for. She wasn't just fighting to save her degree and her scholarship. She was fighting to preserve the online brand that had become her primary source of income and identity. But Madison had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd built her brand on authenticity and academic achievement. When the truth about her fraud and plagiarism became public, her followers would feel betrayed in the most personal way possible. The girl who had inspired them to work hard and pursue their dreams had been lying to them the entire time. The certified letter arrived at my parents' Greenwich home on a Tuesday morning at exactly 9:30 a.m. According to the delivery confirmation I received, Madison's world began to unravel 47 minutes later. When she called my mother in hysterics from her Stanford dorm room, I was in a meeting with potential investors when Garrett knocked on my conference room door. He apologized to the room and whispered that I had an urgent family call. I excused myself and took the call in my office. "Sophia, where are you?" Mom's voice was strained with panic. "Something terrible has happened to Madison." I sat down at my desk, maintaining careful neutrality in my tone. "What's wrong?" "Her scholarship has been revoked. The entire thing. They're demanding she pay back everything, almost $200,000. They're saying she committed fraud on her application. That's very serious." I said, "What kind of fraud?" "Financial misrepresentation. Apparently, they claim we lied about our income when she applied 4 years ago." Mom's voice cracked. "Sophia, we can't afford to pay Stanford without the scholarship. Madison only has 2 weeks to come up with the money or she can't finish her senior semester. Have you contacted a lawyer? Your father is calling everyone he knows. We've already hired Morrison and Associates, but they're saying this might be difficult to fight if the foundation has documentation." I made sympathetic sounds while privately noting that my parents had moved quickly to expensive legal representation. They were taking Madison's crisis seriously in a way they'd never taken my concerns about her theft. "There's more," Mom continued. "Stanford is investigating Madison for plagiarism. They're saying she stole research from another scholar for her senior project. It's the same accusation you made, Sophia." The timing was unfortunate but not coincidental. The Academic Integrity Committee had received my formal complaint the same week the scholarship investigation concluded. Madison was facing parallel crises that reinforced each other. "I should come home," I said. "Families should stick together during times like this." That evening, I drove to Greenwich and found my parents' house in a state of controlled chaos. Legal documents covered the dining room table, and both my parents looked exhausted from a day of crisis management. Madison was in the living room, her laptop open, frantically typing responses to the hundreds of comments on her Instagram post. Her earlier video had gone viral, garnering over 300,000 views and sparking a broader conversation about institutional bias against successful young women. Sophie. Madison looked up when I entered the room, her eyes red from crying. "Thank God you're here. This is a nightmare. Tell me exactly what happened," I said, sitting across from her on the sectional sofa. Madison launched into a detailed explanation of the scholarship revocation, the financial demands, and the plagiarism investigation. She presented herself as the victim of institutional conspiracy, suggesting that Stanford and the foundation were coordinating to destroy her because she'd become too successful as an influencer. "They're saying I stole your research," she said, looking directly at me. "You know that's not true, right? You know I would never do something like that to my own sister." The directness of her lie was breathtaking. Even facing complete academic and financial ruin, Madison couldn't admit what she'd done. "The evidence must be pretty compelling for them to take such serious action," I said carefully. "It's circumstantial at best," Madison replied quickly. "Yes, my paper covered similar topics to your research, but that's because we discuss those concepts together. They're twisting our family conversations into evidence of theft." Over the next 2 hours, I watched Madison work her way through the 5 stages of grief in real time. Denial gave way to anger at Stanford and the Scholarship Foundation. Anger evolved into bargaining, as she proposed various compromises and partial admissions. Depression set in as the legal reality became clearer, but she never reached acceptance, even facing overwhelming evidence. Madison couldn't acknowledge that she'd brought this situation on herself. By Thursday, Madison's crisis had escalated dramatically. Her Instagram following had grown to over 500,000 as news outlets picked up her story. But the attention was becoming increasingly negative as more details emerged. A tech blogger had connected Madison's plagiarism case to my company, noting that the stolen research belonged to Blackwood Technologies' CEO. Comment sections filled with users pointing out the irony that Madison Blackwood had allegedly stolen from someone with the same last name. Madison's brand partnerships began canceling their contracts. First, the sustainable fashion company that had been paying her $3,000 per month for lifestyle posts, then the study app that had sponsored her motivational content, finally, the cosmetics company that had been planning a major collaboration around Madison's graduation. Each cancellation was announced publicly, with companies distancing themselves from Madison's alleged academic misconduct. Her influencer income, which had been averaging $4,000 monthly, disappeared within 48 hours. Bryce's behavior became increasingly distant during this period. He'd been posting regularly on social media throughout their 8-month relationship, but his accounts went silent after news of Madison's scholarship fraud broke. When Madison tagged him in posts asking for support, he didn't respond. Friday brought the Academic Integrity Committee's preliminary decision. Madison's hearing had been expedited due to the severity of the evidence, and the committee had voted unanimously to recommend degree revocation. Professor Mills had presented a devastating analysis of Madison's paper, demonstrating that the research couldn't possibly have been developed independently. The technical complexity, the specialized terminology, and the proprietary methodologies all pointed to systematic theft from an expert source. Madison received the notification while she was filming another Instagram video attempting to defend herself. The combination of stress, exhaustion, and public scrutiny had taken a visible toll on her appearance and composure. In her final video of that week, Madison looked directly into the camera with hollow eyes and said, "I don't understand how this is happening to me. I've worked so hard for everything I've achieved. I don't deserve this." The video received over 1 million views, but the comment section told a different story than her earlier posts. Her followers were beginning to question her version of events, especially as more details about the plagiarism evidence became public. Someone had leaked portions of the Academic Integrity Committee's findings to a Stanford student blogger, who published a detailed comparison of Madison's paper and my original research. The similarities were so extensive that even Madison's most loyal supporters struggled to explain them away. By Sunday evening, Madison's Instagram following had dropped to 300,000, and she'd stopped posting entirely. The girl who had built her identity around social media success couldn't face the platform that had turned against her. She spent most of the weekend in her childhood bedroom, alternating between frantic phone calls with lawyers and long stretches of silence. My parents tiptoed around the house like they were attending a wake. But the worst was yet to come. Madison still didn't know that her scholarship had come from a foundation I'd created, or that her academic investigation had been initiated by my formal complaint. She was about to learn that her own sister had orchestrated her complete destruction. 2 months after Stanford's Academic Integrity Committee had begun their investigation, Madison received the final verdict that would end her academic career permanently. I was in my Manhattan office when Garrett brought me the news, along with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. "It's official," he said, setting a printed email on my desk. "Stanford has voted to revoke Madison's degree. The decision is final and cannot be appealed." I read through the committee's detailed findings, which were more damning than even I had expected. They hadn't just found evidence of plagiarism, they'd uncovered what they described as systematic academic fraud spanning multiple semesters. The investigation had expanded beyond Madison's senior capstone project. Committee members had reviewed her previous coursework and discovered a pattern of suspicious submissions, including 2 papers from her junior year that contained uncredited material from published sources. They also found evidence that Madison had purchased portions of assignments from online essay mills, a discovery that emerged when the committee ran her work through advanced plagiarism detection software. The final report described Madison's theft of my research as unprecedented in both its scope and its audacity. Professor Mills had testified that the stolen work represented years of graduate-level expertise that would have been impossible for an undergraduate communications major to develop independently. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Sophie, I need to see you today. Something terrible has happened, and I don't have anyone else to turn to." Then another message. "Please don't abandon me like everyone else has. I'm your sister." I'd been avoiding Madison's calls and messages for weeks, but I knew this conversation was inevitable. She'd lost her degree, her scholarship, her influencer career, and most recently, her relationship with Bryce, who had dumped her publicly at a Yale fraternity party last weekend. The breakup had been particularly brutal. According to social media posts that had since gone viral, Bryce had announced to a room full of people that he'd only dated Madison because he thought her family had money and connections that could help his medical school applications. When he learned about the financial aid fraud and realized that my parents weren't as wealthy as he'd assumed, he'd lost interest immediately. The video of Madison crying in the middle of the party while Bryce walked away had been shared thousands of times across various platforms. "I'm coming to your office," Madison's next message read. "We need to talk face-to-face." An hour later, building security called to inform me that Madison Blackwood was in the lobby, asking to see me. I told them to send her up. When Madison stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor, I barely recognized her. The polished, confident influencer had been replaced by someone who looked hollow and desperate. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes had the wild look of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Thank you for seeing me," she said as Garrett led her into my office. "I wasn't sure you would." I gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs across from my desk. "You look terrible." "Madison, I feel terrible," she replied. And for the first time in our conversation, she wasn't performing for an audience. "This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. Sophie, my entire life is falling apart, and I don't understand why." She pulled out her phone and showed me her Instagram account. Her follower count had dropped to under 50,000, and her recent posts had more negative comments than positive ones. "4 months ago I had everything," Madison said, scrolling through images of her former life. "A degree from Stanford, a successful social media career, brand partnerships worth thousands of dollars a month, a boyfriend who I thought loved me. Now I have nothing." I watched her break down, and despite everything she'd done, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Madison had never experienced real consequences for her actions before, and the shock was clearly overwhelming. "The plagiarism charges aren't true," she continued, looking directly at me. "I know our conversation about this got heated, but you have to believe me. I would never steal your work." "Madison," I said quietly, "there's something you need to know." She looked up at me with desperate hope, as if I might be about to provide the solution to all her problems. "The Blackwood Foundation scholarship that was paying for your Stanford education. Do you know who founded that organization?" Madison shook her head, confusion evident in her expression. "I did. 8 years ago, I created the Blackwood Foundation and funded it with money from my company. You've been living off my charity for 4 years without knowing it." The color drained from Madison's face. That's impossible. It's completely true. The foundation conducts thorough background investigations of all scholarship recipients. When they discovered that you'd lied about our parents' income on your application, they revoked your award immediately. Madison stared at me in stunned silence for several seconds. You knew I had a scholarship from your foundation, and you still let them take it away. I let them follow their standard procedures for financial aid fraud, I said, which is exactly what you committed when you lied about our family's financial situation. But I'm your sister, Madison said, her voice rising. Even if I made mistakes on the application, you should have protected me. You should have warned me, or helped me fix it, or something. The way you protected me when you stole my research. Madison's face crumpled, and she began crying harder than I'd ever seen her cry. I was desperate. Sophie, the senior project was impossible, and I was so stressed about graduation, and when I saw your work that night, it seemed like the perfect solution. Finally, after months of denial and lies and manipulation, Madison was admitting what she'd done. So you did steal my research, I said. Yes, she whispered. But I didn't know it was worth millions of dollars. I didn't know you were some secret billionaire CEO. I thought it was just academic work that you wouldn't miss. Madison, I've been building my company for over a decade. That research represents years of my professional life. Patents, proprietary algorithm, breakthrough innovations. You didn't just steal a homework assignment. You tried to claim credit for work that could revolutionize entire industries. Madison looked around my office for the first time, really seeing it. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, the expensive furniture, the subtle indicators of serious wealth and success. How long have you been rich? She asked. I founded Blackwood Technologies when I was 23. We've been profitable for 8 years. And you never told us, would it have mattered? You stole from me when you thought I was just your struggling graduate student sister. Would knowing about my success have made you more honest? Or would it have just made you more resentful? Madison didn't answer, but her expression suggested she knew the truth as well as I did. I need you to help me fix this, Madison said, switching tactics from confession to bargaining. You can call Stanford, tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can restore my scholarship. Get my degree back. You have the power to make this all go away. Why would I do that? Because I'm your sister, and I made a mistake. And I'm sorry. Madison's voice became desperate and pleading. I'll do anything. Sophie, I'll pay you back. I'll work for your company. I'll make public apologies. Just please don't let my entire future be destroyed over one bad decision. One bad decision. Madison, you committed financial fraud on your scholarship application. You stole my intellectual property and submitted it to multiple competitions. You filed patent applications using my research. You built an entire social media career on fake authenticity while lying to everyone about your circumstances. That's not one bad decision. That's a pattern of deception and fraud that spans your entire college experience. Madison stood up abruptly and began pacing around my office, her movements agitated and desperate. You don't understand what this is doing to me. I can't get a job anywhere because my degree has been revoked. My parents are barely speaking to me because of the legal bills. I'm a laughingstock on social media. Bryce humiliated me in front of everyone. You're experiencing consequences, I said calmly. For the first time in your life, your actions have resulted in appropriate consequences. Madison spun around to face me, her desperation morphing into anger. Fine. If you won't help me willingly, I'll force you to help me. How? I'll tell everyone about your secret company. I'll go to the media. Tell them how Sophia Blackwood has been hiding billions of dollars while her family struggled. I'll make you the villain in this story. Go ahead, I said. Tell everyone that your sister is successful and that you stole from her anyway. Tell them that you've been living off my charity while committing fraud. See how much sympathy that generates. Madison's threat was empty and we both knew it. She had no leverage left, no cards to play. No way to manipulate her way out of the consequences she'd created for herself. She sank back into the chair, all the fight going out of her. What am I supposed to do now? Sophie, I have nothing left. Now you figure out how to rebuild your life based on who you actually are, not who you've pretended to be. You face the reality that actions have consequences, even for people who think they're special enough to avoid them. Madison looked at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation that was painful to witness. You've destroyed my entire life. No, Madison, you destroyed your own life. I just made sure you couldn't destroy mine in the process. 6 months after Madison's degree revocation became final, I received a comprehensive update on the aftermath from Garrett. He knocked on my office door with his usual stack of reports. But this time his expression carried a mixture of satisfaction and something that looked almost like pity. "Madison's appeals process has been exhausted," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Stanford's final decision stands. Her academic record has been permanently marked with notations for plagiarism and academic fraud. No accredited institution will accept her for graduate study." I set down my coffee and reviewed the documents he'd provided. Madison had spent the last 6 months fighting through every available legal channel, burning through my parents' savings and retirement funds to pay for attorneys who ultimately couldn't change the fundamental facts of what she'd done. What about the financial restitution? The Blackwood Foundation has received partial payment of $37,000, primarily from your parents' liquidating investment accounts. Madison is working at the Westfield Mall, earning $12 an hour at a clothing store. At her current rate of payment, it will take her approximately 15 years to satisfy the remaining debt. The image of Madison folding sweaters and working retail after spending 4 years cultivating an image as an academic achiever and social media influencer struck me as appropriately ironic. She was finally experiencing what it meant to work for minimum wage while carrying crushing debt. "Her Instagram account has been deactivated," Garrett continued. The negative publicity became overwhelming after the Stanford student newspaper published a detailed investigation into her plagiarism case. Her remaining followers were mostly there to watch the downfall rather than support her content. I thought about Madison's final Instagram post, which I'd seen before she'd deleted everything. It had been a rambling, emotional video where she'd attempted to paint herself as the victim of institutional bias and family betrayal. The comment section had been brutal, filled with her former fans expressing anger at being deceived. "What about Bryce?" Garrett pulled up something on his tablet. "Bryce Ashford has moved on quite publicly. He's now dating Caroline Winchester, whose father owns a chain of private hospitals throughout New England. The relationship appears to be following his established pattern of targeting women from wealthy families. The speed with which Bryce had replaced Madison confirmed everything I'd suspected about his motivations. He'd never cared about Madison as a person. She'd been a means to an end, valuable only as long as she could provide social connections and financial opportunities. My parents' situation had deteriorated significantly as well. The legal bills from Madison's defense had drained their savings. But the social consequences had been even more devastating. Greenwich's elite social circles had essentially ostracized them once the full scope of Madison's fraud became public knowledge. Dad's cardiology practice had lost several high-profile clients who questioned his integrity after learning about the family scandal. Mom's real estate business had suffered similar consequences, with wealthy clients choosing other agents rather than risk association with the Blackwood family name. They'd attempted to reach out to me multiple times over the past 6 months, alternating between apologies and accusations. One week they'd call to apologize for not believing me initially. The next week they'd blame me for destroying Madison's future and tearing apart the family. I'd stopped taking their calls after the 3rd cycle of this pattern. They still couldn't acknowledge that Madison's choices, not my response to those choices, had created the situation we were all living with. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find a message from Madison herself. "Sophie, I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not sorry that I got caught, but genuinely sorry for what I did to you. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say it." It was the first communication I'd received from Madison in 3 months. Her previous messages had been angry accusations or desperate pleas for help. This one felt different, more genuine. Another message followed. "I'm working at Forever 21 now and living in Mom and Dad's basement. It's humbling in a way I needed but didn't want. I think I'm finally starting to understand what I actually did to you, not just what it cost me." I showed the messages to Garrett, who read them with raised eyebrows. That's a significant shift in tone from her previous communications. "Do you think she means it?" Garrett considered the question carefully. Madison has lost everything she thought defined her value. Her degree, her social media success, her relationship, her financial security, her social status. Sometimes it takes complete devastation for people to develop genuine self-awareness. I thought about the sister I'd grown up with, the bright, charming child who'd been the center of our family's universe. The college student who'd seemed so eager to connect with me over shared intellectual interests, the young woman who'd systematically stolen years of my professional work while I slept peacefully downstairs. Maybe devastation was what Madison had needed all along. Maybe being protected from consequences her entire life had prevented her from developing the moral framework necessary to make ethical decisions. My research had been successfully published in 3 major journals and had generated significant interest from tech companies worldwide. MIT had offered me a distinguished visiting professorship, and I'd received recognition from several industry organizations for breakthrough innovations in artificial intelligence. The Blackwood Foundation had implemented new screening procedures requiring extensive character assessments and ongoing monitoring of all scholarship recipients. The changes had made it one of the most selective and prestigious programs in the country, attracting exceptional students who demonstrated both academic excellence and personal integrity. I'd found a strange peace in the aftermath of Madison's destruction. My family relationships were effectively over, but I'd learned something valuable about the difference between people who love you and people who love what you provide for them. Success felt different when it wasn't shadowed by family members who took credit for achievements they hadn't earned or demanded support they hadn't reciprocated. For the first time in my adult life, my accomplishments were entirely my own. Madison's final text message arrived as I was preparing to leave the office. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for help. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand why you did what you did. Actions have consequences, even for people who think they're special enough to avoid them. Especially for people like that." I read the message twice before closing my phone. Madison had finally learned the lesson that should have been taught years earlier. Unfortunately, she'd had to destroy her entire life to learn it. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt, but some lessons, once learned, change everything. I hoped for Madison's sake that her lesson had come early enough to matter for whatever life she chose to build from the ashes of the one she'd lost. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How do you balance family loyalty with personal integrity? Your experiences and perspectives help create a community where we can all learn from each other's struggles and triumphs.